Welcome to another episode of Fred and John Talks. And it's obvious that I'm sitting here alone. John's behind the camera. It's his turn to be cameraman and props man. Say hey, John.
Hey, Fred, what's going on?
Hey. This is part two of, talking about mothers. And even though Mother's Day is, 2-3 months past, I can talk about my mother 12 months a year. So I have a cheat sheet because I don't want to leave some good stuff out. Want to make the most of this video. Really want to honor my mother, whose name was Louise. My favorite person in history, my favorite historical figure, second only to Jesus Christ, but as a Christian I believe Jesus Christ was God, is Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln said this: "Everything I am or ever hope to be, I owe to my mother." And he was speaking about his birth mother, even though he was only 9 years old when she died, but she encouraged him from a very young age to be a reader and a learner. And you can look this up on Google because there were 3 books that were his favorites among many other books, but I can't remember the third one. The first one was the Bible, and he read that throughout his life. The second was Aesop's Fables, and I can't remember the third one. This thing about the importance of and the power of the relationships between mothers and sons, I just want to say this before I get into very personal things about my mother. I've read stories and been told anecdotes about how frequently soldiers on the battlefield who were dying, their last words were calling out for their mothers. I even read one story where the man said, "Mommy." So it's a powerful bond, Women carry the gift of life inside them, and doesn't get any closer than that. My mother told many different stories. She was a jokester, and later in the video I'll share how I'm kind of a carbon copy of her. She was a jokester, and she liked to tell stories, but this was no joke. She said to me, once, "Fred, you know how when you're young and you might be at a family gathering or a party of some kind, and the adults ask you, 'What do you want to be when you grow up?'" And she said one day, my mother was an only child, but she had a lot of cousins, second cousins and so on, who lived nearby. And they were all gathered around, and the adults went around the room to all the kids, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And when they came to my mother, they said, "Louise, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And she said, "A mother." And she lived up to that and never changed her mind. My mother had 8 pregnancies and 5 kids. She had 2 miscarriages and 1 stillbirth, but she had 4 boys and a girl. And my youngest brother, the youngest in the family, he was a surprise. She had him when she was 40 years old. And back in that day, that was a little more dangerous than it is now. And he was a Christmas present. He was born on Christmas Day, 1965. So, a little bit about my mom. My mother was a lifelong piano player and later church organist. And she was generous enough to pass on the musical gene to me because I'll tell you in a minute about myself. But my mother had a hard time reading music. I've encountered this with a lot of musicians, that it's rare to meet a musician who's very excellent at sight reading music and has a very, very good ear. They seem to have one or the other. I think it's something about the brain, but my mother could hear a piece of music for the first time and play it on the piano. As I always say, my mother was great at parties and family gatherings. We have photos, tons, of everybody gathered around the piano with Louise playing whatever song, you wanted her to play. She tells a story about how her parents got her piano lessons when she was very young. And the teacher would give her homework to learn to read the music on, the sheet music. And the teacher would come for a lesson, and Louise would be playing the piece while looking at, the keyboard. And the piano teacher would say, "Louise, look at the music." And my mother always told me, she said, "Freddie, I just had a hard time." And I can remember even in, as I grew up and later into her years, she had a hard time playing classical music. She did okay because she worked at it hard, but she never became a good classical pianist. She was more popular music and musical theater, and boy, was she fun. She sang sing-along songs. She played sing-along songs. Well, and this gets into where I come into the picture musically. I wanted to learn to play a musical instrument. And when I was in elementary school, when I was in the 5th grade, at that time, I don't know if they do this anymore, I hope they do, the music department would supply the musical instrument. It would be on loan to you, and the music teacher would give you lessons. My memory's fading. I used to know his name. I could still see his face. Anyway, I go down, Mr. Montecalvo, good Italian. I go up to him and I say, in my boyhood machismo, I said, "I want to learn to play the trumpet." And he said, "All I have left is one flute." And I said, "I'll take it." And I am really glad he didn't have a trumpet, because I've been playing the flute on and off since I was in the 5th grade. I played in church groups. My mother and I later became a team, piano and flute, organ and flute. We played at masses. We were Roman Catholic. We played at masses on the weekends. We played even at weddings and at funerals. And we were a team. And I missed that. So I want to wrap up this segment with an anecdote. My mother died 7 years ago. As I've said in a previous video, she and my father lived to 90 and died 7 months apart after 68 years of marriage. She died 7 years ago, and I still think about my mother almost every day. Not that I don't think about my dad, but I had a very, very special bond with my mother. Well, every morning, I have my coffee out on my wonderful front porch at my house, and the birds are up and about, and they're landing on the power lines and the telephone lines across the street. Well, to give this story a context, my mother had a very endearing thing that she used to say, not only to me, but I remember it and I want to tell it. I'd be visiting them when I was a young adult. I wasn't living at home anymore, but I'd be visiting them, and I'd stay up late watching the sports news on TV, and my mother would be nodding asleep in the next chair, and she would wake up and then get up and with the intention of, going to bed. And she would typically turn to me and say, "Are you going to stay up longer?" And I said, "Yeah." And she sat back down. She said, "I'll keep you company." So here's my last story. So I'm out on the front porch, and there's birds landing on the wires and everything. But this one bird started to land on the wire and stay there, facing me, and stay there a long time. Not just, birds usually come and flit away, especially if they're alone. And I said, you know, half jokingly, you know, but I believe my mother is in a better place. I believe she's in heaven. I said, hey, Mom, is that you coming to keep me company? Well, one day, the bird comes, lands on the wire, facing away from me, with his back to me. And I said, oh, Mom, I don't think that's you, because you would be facing me. And I said to the bird, and I didn't even get the sentence out, but here's what I said. I said, if you're my mother coming to see me, I'll bet you can't turn around on that wire. I'll bet you have to fly. And I was about to say fly away and fly back on, and the bird turned around on the wire to face me. And I said, hey, Mom. So I say in signing off, hey, Mom, I hope to see you sometime soon, sooner or later.